And so you kind of do a lot of work, because this is coming from health people, from health communication scholars, things like that.
Okay.
So she's asking, what's the ecological one?
So it's more so just about the environment that you're involved in. And so if you're looking at it from the perspective of the individual, that they're set in this environment, and you start in the center as an individual, but then you have, so it's really, like you look at it visually to like the series of concentric circles are what help to establish this environment to show you how they build upon one another more so. So more about the environment.
So interactions between
Exactly.
individual and
Right.
Yeah.
other aspects.
Yeah, and how the interactions, and not necessarily just the individual. It starts there. It can go from in out, or it can go from top down, or different areas. But the back and forth, and basically to say that an individual's health isn't necessarily one factor, but it's all of these factors that interact and are transactional.
Like one of the examples of that is just between these two, right? Like say one individual wants to start eating a lot better and those type of things, but if everyone in their household doesn't change, right, it's so much more difficult in some senses, right? So you're trying to just think of all the multiple levels that are kind of involved with that. And, you know, a lot of the work that I actually not doing with the centers at this level, right, a lot of the work that we work with United Way and some of the other coalitions is you have all these wonderful nonprofits, but they're all kind of doing things a little bit differently. They're all in a lot of ways competing, because they're competing for the same dollars and those type of things. So for us to kind of create a better model of how those nonprofits kind of work together better and kind of support each other better, so it's a useful model to kind of think about all the different levels. Okay. So I think we're going. So I'm gonna
Was that? Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, because I don't very often understand using words from ecological field in social political say areas. And yeah, for me it's why
Yeah.
If you shoot me an email, I'll give you your card. So David Matthews, who's the president of the Kettering Foundation that we talked about, his last book was The Ecology of Democracy. So he uses kind of the ecological metaphor for the whole thing about how communities work and those type of things. So it might be, I'm sure they get free copies everywhere. So if you give me your address, I can send you a free. She might have some free ones. It's first time I went to Kettering Foundation was for a conference, and you're checking into the conference, and they had like basically 20 tables of material. I'm like, what is all that? It's like, oh, just take whatever you want. You know, I'm kind of one of those people that hoard books. You know, so every time I go to Kettering Foundation, I literally bring an empty bag. And I fill it on to pass it out to my students. So and I'll be there in 2 weeks. So if anything, I can just send you. Okay, yeah, so we're here. So finished faith in human nature. So then all of this is based on, again, that notion of interactive communication. To be able to tap into the good parts of human nature and to draw the wisdom of crowds, we need better ways of talking to each other. And like we said before, it's not easy to talk to each other like this, so then having the capacity of having small groups, having a trained facilitator, and this is really what Wendy and I's program, by using students, kind of allows that, right? That we can have, because one way to think about it is passion and partiality is a pretty rare resource, right? There's not that many people that are really fired up about not having an opinion, right? And so for communities to do this, for them to kind of find 15 volunteers to be passionate and partial facilitators, well, the most passionate people about community, typically have a position, right? And they're known for having that position. But I can show up with these students, and students are just this great resource that they want the skills and they're passionate maybe about their community, but for a city issue, they might not have really a direct opinion. There's sometimes that I have a student that's really passionate about something that, I'll tell them, like, if you can't facilitate this, right, then don't, right? You can be a participant, take your name tag off, you can be a participant in a way. But for most of these issues, they kind of play this role, right? So this facilitating interactive communication is kind of the heart of the work. That's why I wanted you to, flipping through this, we can get into this a lot more next time, but if you turn to kind of page 8, if you printed it out, or I guess page 7 starts it, it has these dialogue and deliberation streams of practice. So there's all these kind of ways of doing this work, all kind of based on interactive communication. Some processes are for exploration, like how do we start really thinking about an issue, more kind of diversion, kind of the divergent thinking kind of side of things. Some are conflict transformation. How do we take a specific issue where there's people that really don't understand each other in conflict and transform that conflict? That field itself, it used to be conflict resolution, and then it changed its term from conflict resolution to conflict management or conflict transformation, right? And I think it's based on that with the problems idea. Now, we're not going to resolve these conflicts. Conflict is going to be inherent, right? So it's about how do we deal with the conflict and how do we kind of transform the conflict to be productive conflict, right? And for some people, productive conflict seems like that doesn't make sense, right? But that's really what we're doing. We're going to have conflict. We're going to think differently. The issues inherently have values underlying, and then the people rank those values differently, right? So it's all about how do we kind of productively address that conflict. Some of it's decision making. So a lot of stuff we do for the city or the school board is they have to make a decision. We're trying to give them a better sense of the public voice and also refine that public voice. And then sometimes it's collaborative action. Sometimes it's it's like the stuff that we've been doing with poverty. It's as a community, how do we react to this, right? There's not one decision maker. So the next several pages of this just have lots of different kind of talks through those 4 streams, and then has lots of different examples of processes that kind of work with those streams. The really nice thing about this field, about NCDD, is people share like crazy. If you look at this, and I think we sent you the link, right? So you have the links if you want them. Almost every one of these different ways of doing things, there's a website. Most of those websites, all the information on how to do it. They'll have facilitator guides, 100-page facilitator guides, and training workbooks that people just share, right? And I gave you my 110-page workbook, right? But there's just true believers in this field that want people to talk better, right? So there's not so much of the this is mine, you have to pay for it kind of thing. There's plenty of training programs you can pay for. There's one just last thing when you think about interactive communication, the 3 Ds. So debate, dialogue, and deliberation are just 3 interactive technologies essentially. When I started this work, I used to teach debate a lot and got very frustrated with it. So I kind of came up, focus and deliberation as an alternative. But then I was convinced, the more I looked at it, was too often we kind of threw debate out too early, right? So good debate can be very useful. The problem is about 95% of the debate you see is bad debate, right? So instead of just kind of getting rid of debate, a lot of the work, so we sponsored some debates, but typically with a pretty strong moderator, right? So it's not just a spectacle. It's not just, oh, look, who gets the nice singer, right? Who makes the other side look bad? But it's really a debate, kind of how do we design this so expert can really have a tough conversation that really helps us understand issues, right? So that's what we'll talk about more of this tomorrow if you want, but the main class I teach for everyone to take, not just my specialized students, is called public argumentation, and it's about a third debate and a third deliberation, and then a third kind of argumentation and kind of fallacies and logic and that kind of stuff. But we really try to teach debate as a useful model. Actually, I think the story of that class is maybe will be helpful to kind of cap off the morning in a sense. So I used to teach debate. It's a typical class required lots of communication majors. I had 24 students. They formed 6 teams of 4 students each. The very beginning of the semester, they pick a topic. Right? They pick a topic they really care about, and then they have to frame it as a debate, do tons of research, evidence cards, and do a brief. So it's really research, kind of expert-based, right, data. And then they have to frame it as a yes/no question, right? The United States should build a wall or whatever, right? And then they have a 2-on-2 debate, affirmative versus negative, and then they switch sides and have the debate again, right? So by the end of the semester, they've spent all semester long researching this issue and have 2 debates, and they were forced to make the argument for yes and the argument for no. Right? And at the end of the second debate, I always kind of made the second debate a little shorter, so I'd have about 10 minutes in class after the second debate to say, okay, you're no longer affirmative or negative. You're a real person that's researched this issue all year long, right? What's your position? What do you think? What should we do? Right? About 85% of the students, I started keeping statistics the last 3 or 4 times I taught it. What do you think they said? I don't know.
Yeah, completely.
Most of them picked the topic because they were passionate for a yes or a no, right? We have to build a wall, or we have to do that, whatever, right? But forced to research both sides, and forced to really research. We had high quality, high expectations. They had to have government documents. It wasn't just like Google, Wikipedia. They had to do some real research, right? But forced to do both sides. The whole debate model is kind of based on the data will tell you yes or no, right? But forced to do both, they had really good arguments on both sides in some ways, and then they kind of got stuck.
Yep.
So I realized this whole class is designed, and what I was really worried about is they spent all semester long studying that issue. At the end, they didn't know. I think they were demotivated, right?
Yes.
I think they're like, why do I bother, right? I'm going to just go watch TV, right? So I changed. So I started actually, I studied presidential rhetoric. I studied Clinton a lot. Clinton, at the beginning of his second term, did a President's Race Initiative, right? Some of y'all might have remembered that. That was, 92, I guess, right? Or 96. Well, with the Race Initiative, the White House sent out all this material on how to have tough conversations about race. It had all this material about dialogue and deliberation. So I'm this debate teacher teaching this class. Also, I'm reading this material on dialogue and deliberation, I'm like, this is what we need to be doing, but not debate, right? So then I started transitioning the class. So we still do the debate, right? So we still do a lot of the research because again, good debate can be useful. Good debate. So part with the debate, part with the research, good information is elevated, bad information is kind of taken out, right? So they realize from the debate, it's really hard in the debate when the other side's there to make a really bad argument because the other side will kind of attack that, right? So the debate kind of works as this crucible to kind of burn off the bad arguments and keep the good arguments. But again, the debate doesn't get us to a yes or a no. The debate helps clarify what's the good information. Then the last third of the class, they do, and I'll talk a lot more about this, how they do this tomorrow if you're interested, is they create a discussion guide, kind of like this discussion guide you're doing here. This is NIF framework, right? What the NIF framework is here's a broad problem we all agree with. What should we do about this, right? And we all frame it in a way that most people agree it's a problem. And then you offer at least 3 different approaches to that problem, not solutions. You'll solve these problems. 3 different approaches, right? Each of those approaches is framed within wicked problems. Each of the approaches is not a magic bullet that fixes it, right? Each of the approaches has certain values that it elevates over others, right? And has certain actions and ideas that really kind of help with that aspect, but then also each approach has some trade-offs, right? We're gonna focus on this, but we're gonna have to give up this, right? So then the NIF model, actually let me get it to you here. So the NIF model is kind of set up to, what do I do again? This way. So this is kind of one of the basic tools. It's this 2-hour meeting in a sense. Again, framed very simply. Here's a common problem we all agree with. Here's at least 3 different approaches. The actual process itself is you'll spend time after you introduce the model and you kind of let people talk about why they're there and kind of their values. Then you walk through each of the approaches systematically, right? So this is what we'll do here in a second. We're running out of time a little bit, so we'll do it a little shorter, but you'll get a sense of it. But normally you spend about 20 minutes on each approach, really thinking through that. With a facilitator, the facilitator is trying to make sure you think about both sides. What do you like about this approach? What do you not like about it? What do you kind of struggle with this approach? So once you've walked through the 3, then you have another 30 minutes or an hour at the end. Now that we've had this conversation, where we move forward. And the design of the approaches aren't, at the end you don't vote. You don't say, how many of y'all for approach 1? Raise your hand, because you're not trying to pick which one to do. The design of the approach is to ensure a full conversation, to make sure you see lots of different sides of it, right? Typically going in, you might really like an approach, but the design of the process will help you realize that, that there's some flaws here, right? And you might really not like another approach, but the way it's framed, an outside impartial body is framing the approaches. They're framing kind of as fairly as possible. They're framing for deliberation, framing for people to have a tough conversation. Most of our framing in society is framing for persuasion, right? I'm framing it to get people to think like I want them to think, right? We're framing things because we want them to have a tough conversation, right? So then the back end, the kind of reflections time at the end, after, the deliberation is walking through the approaches. Typically it's 3, it's at least 3, sometimes it's 4 or 5, right? Part of the reason for 3 is you're getting away from the pro-con, right? The way it's framed, it should be that you don't have one approach that's the opposite of another approach, right? Each approach, you're kind of looking at doing the approach and not doing the approach within that approach, right? So each approach should be somewhat distinct. And so you'll see a couple different examples. I think we copied in your guide of the pages from my workbook. I think you have some examples. Yeah, here, my little cheat sheet. If you look on page 48, 48 and 49, you have some additional examples. A lot of times these workbooks, NIF creates these workbooks. Public Agenda also does, so there's a lot of workbooks out there. So in terms of class, you can find pre-made material on tons of different issues that you can just use in your class for conversation. What I do in that deliberation class is they have to create one of these, right? So they're assignment for the semester. And the reason why I think the class works so much better now when we pull it off, it's a hard class to pull off. At the end of the semester, instead of them saying, oh, I don't know, right, because of the 2 debates, right? At the end of the semester, they feel they know something, right? Because we didn't ask them to solve the issue, right? We didn't ask them to come up with the best solution to this tough problem, right? We asked them to make sense of the issue and to lay out the options, right? So, and I think this is really the role of the expert society. The expert can't tell us, you need to do X. The expert can tell us, hey, you can do X, Y, and Z, and here's what happens if you have X, Y, and Z, and here's the trade-offs of it, right? But the decision is the public's decision, right? Because again, there's not a right answer, right? There's better and worse answers depending on what's important to you, right? So now at the end of the semester, the students feel like experts, right? I know about this issue. They might prefer a certain option, right? But again, the role role of the expert is not to make the decision. The role of the expert is like, these are the choices you have to make, right? And these choices and this information based on good information and research that helps us really understand it, right? So that's what these discussion guides. When you look at deliberation broadly, there are several aspects to deliberative practice that helps us have a better conversation. So part of it is good background material, right? That's created by an impartial source that provides a base of information. You know, there's a lot of statistics and things in here, right? And then you have the small groups, so you can actually have interaction. You have a facilitator that can kind of help you have that conversation. We'll get a lot into that this afternoon. You have, you know, at the beginning of the meeting, you talk about the ground rules and goals, right? So at the beginning of my meetings, I talk a little bit about deliberation. I often show the grown zone graphic to the public. I talk about what we're doing and talk about the need to work through. I talk a little bit about tensions and, you know, give a little mini lecture, not a 2-hour one like this morning, but a little, you know, 8-minute lecture on kind of wicked problems and how we have to change the way we talk. So we kind of setting an environment. And then the ground rules, I'll show you ground rules later, but you know, talk about how, you know, to listen to understand and to kind of respect other perspectives, and, but also to be honest, right? So we're negotiating that. We're negotiating civility. I tend not to use the word civility. It's a very popular word now. Some people don't like civility because civility is used to quiet voices a lot of times, right? Sometimes we need to be angry, right? You know, so there's that negotiation. We want people to be respectful of other opinions, but we also want people to be truthful, right? And we don't want people to hold back in a sense because they think that what they're saying might not be inappropriate, right? So we try to set these ground rules to kind of do that. We have one ground rule that we really like. It's always, it's okay to disagree, but disagree with curiosity and hostility, right? We want people to, we invite them to disagree. We don't want, you know, if someone else is saying something they disagree with, we want them to say, I think differently than that, right? We want to open up that space, but we also don't want them to attack that person, right? And that's one of the interesting design aspects. By having good background material, which is typically built through public process, right? Like the superintendent example, we had 2,000 surveys. From those 2,000 surveys, we developed background materials that we're reacting to, right? So now, instead of me having to disagree with Ashley to her face, I can disagree with this, right? It allows me, because we don't know how to disagree, right? Some people love disagreeing, right? Some people love conflict, and most people avoid conflict. Very few people are in the middle, which kind of try to make conflict productive, right? So by having background material to react to, it makes it easier for people to have a tough conversation without having to disagree with people at the table. They can disagree with this, right? And it gives you a mechanism to do that. And then obviously the facilitator is making it easier for people to disagree in a productive way by how they ask questions and those type of things. And you'll see, we'll talk about those kind of questions in a little bit, right? Yeah, so that's the kind of basic NIF model. You know, I would probably say a third, maybe a half of our processes kind of use this model in some sense of having different approaches, right? Lots of other models, and again, the NCD resource guide shows, you know, wisdom cafes and citizens juries, and you know, all these different kind of ways of kind of doing this work. But we'll focus today on the NIF model. It's a nice base model, and it's a really good model for classrooms. Political science classrooms, communication classrooms. We go into economics classes and do forums like this. We go into sociology classes. You know, there's books on race issues. There's books on integration issues. You know, there's so many different topics in there that we serve. You know, one of the other kind of roles that we serve, I don't know how much Wendy does this, is we're kind of the deliberation center on campus, right? Just like there's probably a speaking center, right? That we can kind of help you train students how to give a good speech, or a writing center, help you kind of train your students how to write. You know, that maybe your discipline isn't writing, but you need some help. So the deliberation centers on campus can be, hey, if you want to have an interactive conversation in your class, but you don't know how to do that, right? Sometimes I bring my students to other classes and we split them up and have these conversations. Often using these preset books that already exist online. You've got a cool, again, Public Agenda and NIF have tons of them. Most of them are free online, or maybe a buck or two to get the PDF, or you can kind of produce your own. So we're going to be doing, in a second here, we're going to jump in and kind of use the Shaping Our Future as an example to kind of, you know, you'll be the participants, I'll be the facilitator, to kind of show you a little bit how one works. And then this afternoon, we'll do another one with just a one-page framing, right? And we normally do the one-page framing. Most of these NIF books, these are short. These are the new ones. This one's 12 pages. They used to be about 30 pages, again, the 3 approaches. But the last 2 pages would be a summary, just like this one. And the last 2 pages are a summary. We knew people showing up, like for class, we can give them the 30-page one and assign it. They're supposed to read it and come to class. But for the public, we can't, right? Even if we have a 30-page one, who reads it?
Yeah.
You know, so most of the time we would just use these 2 pages at the end. we would call it a placemat. We would photocopy it, one big piece of paper, like 11 by 17, and they would have it in front of them like a placemat. So that's kind of what we'll be doing here is mainly, hopefully you got to read the whole thing, but even if you didn't, just have those last 2 pages in front of you. We'll walk through that, and that becomes just something to react to for the facilitator to kind of use, right? So some of our events, all we've done is develop a 1-page summary. Here's one thing just to react, to help kind of structure the conversation, to help us have a little deeper conversation.
Martine, do you think we have time to watch the video, or should we get straight to the?
So lunch is getting here at 12:15, right?
Yeah, well, we have it scheduled to eat at 12:30. They said they're gonna be here at 12.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, we can split it. We can do part of it and then have lunch and then do the other part. So
Okay.
I got time afterwards. We had to read the forum. We got quite a bit of time after lunch, so we don't have to finish the forum before lunch. So we can show the, because the other thing NIF does is they normally develop little 10-minute videos to introduce the topics. So again, in your classes, you know, and the videos are nice because to introduce a topic, you have to be careful. You want to frame it, you know, fairly to the different sides and things like that. So kind of doing that yourself can be tough. So that allows you a video to kind of frame it in a way that hopefully kind of lays it out. So we'll kind of do that example here in a second. Make sure I talk about these. So yeah, the NIF model, typically 2 or 3 hour meetings. It's a medium-sized group. What we normally do is we'll do this, but we'll have 15 tables doing it at the same time. Right? And I'll talk a little about note taking before we go to. Works best when multiple similar meetings are held and you really see how different kind of people react to it. Issues or focus are a common problem in at least 3 approaches. I talked about that. Discussion of the approaches is focused on having participants explore appreciation and concerns with dedicated. So all deliberative practices, you're making choices to structure the conversation in a certain way. We recognize, though, going back to passion partiality, by us structuring the conversation in a certain way, that's a lot of power, right? There's always been a constant negotiation between letting the people talk about what they want to talk about and us kind of, no, we're going to structure, you're going to react to this data in a sense. Right? So one of the boxes that at least the NIF model in particular uses is we're going to focus on what you like and don't like about these 3 approaches, right? Especially during the heart of the deliberation. Now, when you get to reflections time, you're cutting across the approaches, you're adding new approaches, you're opening it up, right? But again, it's the notion that we don't have enough time to just talk about everything, right? So it is a structured conversation, but we recognize that we're using a lot of power when we structure the conversation that much, right? But you'll see when we do this, especially for the note, if we're doing this for real, we're taking notes. And I think Wendy's going to take notes to kind of show you an example of the type of notes you take with an NIF form or way. But I'm going to force the conversation into why do you like this approach and why don't you like the approach, right? And partly the reason is because that's the data that's most useful. If I have 15 conversations going at the same time, having a list of notes that's primarily organized into these are the reasons they like it and these are the reasons they don't like it, right? And then you'll have some other stuff or questions that might come up or other concern, you know. So the shorthand that I use and when you were kind of showing is a comment that someone makes in support of it will be a plus, comment against it is a minus, and then just a bullet point for just a general comment. Right? But you imagine I have 15 conversations for 2 hours. At the end of that, all those students type up their notes and send them to me, and then I have this whole long list of it's what's important to people. We did this for this grade configuration issue with the school district. We had them all written down. We're using easels, right? So we're taking all the notes on easels so people can kind of see the public notes. Right? At the end, we gave everyone 5 dots, and we said, put the dots next to the arguments that are kind of most resonating with you. Right? So they got up and read through everything and put the dots. So then now we had kind of some quantitative data of the reasons people liked or didn't like each approach, you know, and the weight of those reasons, how strong they were. So when we give our report to the school district, telling the school district, the people that showed up to our meetings who weren't representative, right, who showed up were people who were passionate about the issue, you know, which approach they liked of keeping it the same or changing it in a couple different ways with this issue wasn't as relevant as why they were for or against the change. Right? So what the NIF model did was instead of looking at the policy or what they wanted, it was why did they want it. Right? And that was huge for helping them make the decision because the school district could see what do people care about and why, right? But also they could, you know, sometimes people cared about things that were wrong, right? They could look at it, okay, they were against this, but the reason they were against it is a reason that's not true, right? Or the evidence doesn't support it, so they can kind of not take that as seriously, right? But even more importantly, it was huge for the implementation of the decision. Once the district decided to change, to do option B essentially, right? They could look at everything that people liked about option A and say, how can we try to do some of that, right? And they could look at all the concerns about option B, right? And say, how do we mitigate that? but that's because the public process that we did forced people into the arguments they were for and against stuff versus just asking them what they were for and against. That makes sense? So that helps us really kind of dig deep. So that's why I'll force y'all into that box sometimes. My follow-up question is like, so from that comment, does that mean you support this, or is that a concern that you have, right? And you'll see it bounce back and forth. And as a facilitator, say if we have 20 minutes per approach, in my head, I want to spend, not 10 minutes on each in a sense, but some nice time on what you like and what you don't like about the approach. So if everyone at the table seems to love it, then I'm going to push people to say, what's wrong about this, right? People that don't like this approach, what's important to them, right? If everyone's dumping on it, then I'm going to push, okay, we all don't seem to like it, but does anyone say anything good to say? I'll try to push. And you can't really say, we're going to spend 10 minutes on the good stuff and 10 minutes on the bad stuff, because someone's argument about good might spark someone's argument against that, right? So it's going to be kind of flexible, and it's interaction. And you'll see me facilitate, and then this afternoon I'll talk about all the facilitation tactics I used, right? And then you'll get some time to practice, right? We have food here. Do we want to go a little bit and then? It's not warm or anything, right?
Yeah, why don't we eat and then we'll feel
We can
like,
take a break and then
have
we
some
can
more
do it.
energy.
And most of the time, deliberation, there is food involved, right? breaking bread, bizarre events, I have food. So with that, these are the ground rules. I don't know why the first one is a different bullet point. These are my base ground rules that I use. And each different process, I kind of do something a little bit different. If you print out my full course book, there's like 10 pages at the end of ground rules from different organizations. Just kind of change the conversation. What the ground rules allow me to do when I go through the ground rules, and I'll actually kind of go into forum mode here in a second, pretend this isn't a training, it's a forum, and I'll show you how I might go through these ground rules. But in a way, it gives me a chance to kind of talk about deliberative theory, right? And kind of set that purpose in a way. So yeah, I'll do that in a second. If assume y'all showed up. We've already done some things at the beginning of the forum. I've introduced myself. I talked about deliberation a little bit. Talked about how we need to change the conversation. I've told you the goals of our forum, the reason why we're doing this. I've told you what we're doing with the information. I've told you our partners that we're working with and those type of things. So then now we're about to kind of send it to the small groups. I'm about to send it to my students, right? So before we do that, right? So the conversations we'll have today are going to be governed by some ground rules. And I normally have these posted on the walls or on the tables or whatever. First, speak honestly and respectfully, and we do need both ends of that, which there's a tension between them, right? So we want you to speak respectfully, but we also want you to be honest. If you're passionate about something, we need you to express that, right? One way to think about this is we want you to be tough on the issue, but easy on the people, right? So speak your truth and don't hold back in some ways, but still you can frame things in a way that are going to be more respectful to people at your table. Listen to understand. This is not a typical human emotion, right? We're wired to listen for flaws and people that we disagree with. Or one of the quotes I often share here is from an old New York governor that the art of listening in the United States is a competitive exercise in which the first person to take a breath is deemed the listener. So often when we're arguing with people, they stop talking, it's our turn, right? So we're going to ask you today, listening is just as important as talking at these things, right? Really listen to each other, ask each other questions. If someone disagrees with you, try to find out why they think that way, instead of kind of assuming the worst in a sense, right? Third, it's okay to disagree, but do so with curiosity, not hostility. This is a tough issue. There's going to naturally be disagreements, right? As a community, we need to explore those disagreements and try to make those disagreements productive and help us kind of understand them. So if someone's saying something you disagree with, we need you to speak up. But you can speak up in a way, that, again, that's respectful and try to understand why they think that way and try to negotiate between the two of y'all versus attacking them for thinking that way, right? And then last, be brief. Luckily, we have small groups, but we do ask you to kind of share the airtime. Certainly part of the role of facilitator will help to kind of get everyone involved in this. We won't make everyone speak, but try to kind of have some balance in there kind of as we go through. And then normally we say, so does everyone in the room agree, at least for the next hour or so, to kind of play by these rules? For some reason, the psychologists tell us an actual non-verbal, like raise your hand, is powerful for people to do that, right? I will say, we added the, it's okay to disagree after our first couple of years, because we could tell people were being too nice, right? That it was just too much of a polite conversation. So we decided we need to add something in there to balance it. We don't want the ground rules to silence people, right? We don't want them to kind of hold back, so with both the speak honestly and it's okay to disagree, we're inviting people to disagree, and we're making that easier, right? Research I'm hoping finishing in the next few days about a lot of stuff I'll do this afternoon with Deliver Facilitator. We're learning that we expect these facilitators to do all these things, it's hard to do them, so the more we set things up from the front of the room and set the environment, it enables the facilitator to do more, right? So part of those ground rules are kind of putting things in people's head so then the facilitator can follow up with some specific things later on, right? And make it easy. That's the kind of ground rules. So we're going to go ahead and show the video here, which is just a little 10-minute video to kind of to start off this conversation, which again, the NIF one kind of has these videos. This is what I wrote. Does that get it, right? And that's just to kind of show people we're taking you seriously. We're capturing the notes, right? After our community events, we normally try to as soon as possible. Hopefully within a week, we post all the raw data. Here are all the notes at the table. Here are the data from the worksheets that we had. So we get them all right out. Then a few weeks after that, we might post a report of making sense of it. Here are the themes. Here's what we kind of learned. Here's some interesting questions that came up or whatever. But we try as much as possible to kind of, and that's what we tell people at the beginning of events. This is how we're collecting data. This is what we're doing with the data. Here's how, and try to fulfill that. That's hard, right? Because that analysis takes a long time afterwards, right? So we'll show you an example here of the public notes, because we just have one group, so it's pretty easy for us to do on the computer. Now the disadvantage of doing it on the computer is not everything's going to fit on the screen, right? So you'll see it as she's kind of typing it, but then it'll kind of disappear in a way, right? We've done some processes. There's now this technology that's basically a projector on stilts, right? So maybe if one of y'all want to give me a big grant, I'll buy a lot of those for me, or actually you should probably give it to Wendy. So it's basically a projector on stilts that turns your table into a projector, right? So the student can be taking the notes and everyone kind of sees it, those type of things. So lots of ways. So the note-taking strategy is a process in itself, right? But the main thing is you want to kind of capture it. And to be honest, I do more and more writing now, having people do writing, for two reasons. One is most of this conversation, it's first one who talk wins, right? It's like popcorn style, which means all the extroverts talk, right? And the introverts don't. So writing kind of allows everyone to kind of get a voice in. Writing is just great data for me. You have a good question. So you have the conversation that helps you really think through the issue. And then at the end you say, what's the most important thing when even with the approaches, sometimes we'll have a worksheet that at the end of each approach we say, what do you like most about this approach? And what's one concern or question you have about this approach? So that now I'm just getting all of that data from people, which is improving. Part of it honestly too is, I don't know how to teach students how to take good notes. So some of them are just good note takers and some of them are not. So we'll have 15 tables. In 5 tables, we'll have 15 pages of notes. 5 tables will have 8, and then 5 tables will have 1.5, right? And I'm like, I know it wasn't that the conversation was so much better else, So by doing some writing, by doing some surveys, those type of things, it balances out and just gives you more information. It kind of goes back to that cycle of reporting. I want exposed to these ideas and exposed to interaction, like what are people thinking, right? What's important to them? So that's kind of, you'll see that. The degree to which the facilitator interacts with it, we'll talk a lot this afternoon. The notes are often your friend as a facilitator. It gives you a lot of reasons to intervene. It gives you reasons to jump in when someone's dominating, right? Because you can say, okay, I want to make sure we capture what you're saying. Instead of just shut up, you kind of, what you're saying is so important, we want to write it down. So there's good interaction between the facilitator and the note taker. I always tell my students to sit next to each other. Even if it's not public notes, I want the facilitator to see the notes. So they can kind of maintain a pace. They can make sure that the note taker's job is not to decide what's important to write down or not. So every person that speaks that says something substantive, the note taker should write something down, right? So if the note taker is struggling, then the facilitator can kind of help paraphrase or that type of thing. So I'll try to kind of exhibit some of those things. Be a little bit difficult because it's kind of behind me in a sense, right? But I'll try to kind of show you the pace of that as we go. Right? So if we're doing this for real, we did the introduction stuff, I introduced myself, we talked about the topic, why it's an important topic. With this case, we got it to you beforehand, and plus you saw the video, so I won't do too much of the framing of the issue, I'll let that kind of frame. The other step, I guess we won't switch back, if you saw the steps in I form, one of the steps is personal stake. Well, personal stake is normally do it before the video, because if you do it after the video, people react to the video. But we just ask people, why did you come? It's always difficult to do personal stake during our training, because you didn't come here for the issue, right? You came here for, or if we're doing it in the classroom. But most of our real events, people decided to leave their homes and give a night to this topic, right? And this is part of that negotiation between too much structure and too little structure. So we first just want to say, why do you care about this issue, right? Let them kind of talk about it in their grounds before we provide our framework, right? And it does a couple different things if it works well. It helps people at the table see lots of people are coming this from different places, right? And it helps the facilitator kind of see what are some of the underlying values that are going to be in play today, right? So I'm going to try to model that. Again, it's a little bit weird to model it. I guess y'all are all tied to higher ed, so I'm assuming you have an opinion about this, right? But assume for a minute that you just saw a flyer about, hey, we're going to have a conversation about the role of higher ed in society, and you decided to show up, and then you're here, right? Sometimes the personal stake, you have everybody, and when my students are at a table, there's 8 people, 2 students and then 6 participants. We have everyone introduce themselves. The sooner you can make people talk, the better, because once they've talked once, they're much more likely to talk again, right? NIF forums, sometimes there are 20 people, and it would be hard to have all 20 talk at the beginning, right? It's called, a round is when everyone talks, and then popcorn is just you ask a question, whoever wants to talk to you. So we try to do rounds every once in a while, and the fact that I have so many students that can break up the groups into smaller groups, it's a lot easier to do rounds, right? This is a little bit what we have 8 people, right? So a little on the bigger side than normal, but pretty still small size, right? So I might not do a round, but I might just kind of try to get most of y'all to kind of explain, right?
Do you want me to record the personal stake?
Normally we don't record the personal stake, right? It's just kind of a safe setting. As a facilitator, sometimes I might take notes for myself on a personal stake, just to help your memory. Because part of your job as a facilitator to make people feel heard, and for me to bring something up later on that, you know, like when you introduced yourself, you said this was really important to you, and I can ask a follow-up question, right? So I might jot some notes down in terms of what people said, just because it might be useful for me. But we don't tend to take a public notes on the personal stake, right? It's just more kind of an introduction kind of thing. All right, so we'll kind of go into mode here. So we've done all the stuff in the front of the room. Now we're at this small table. Normally we wouldn't have tables. We would be at a table together, or just a circle of chairs sometimes, right? But I know y'all might want to be taking notes and that kind of stuff, so we'll kind of keep the table. We don't have these barriers as well. All right, so before we get into the 3 approaches, we want to do what's called personal stake, which is really just kind of letting you introduce yourself quickly, and just why did you come? Well, how does this issue connect to you? What's important to you when you think about this issue, right? So maybe we don't have to hear from everybody, but maybe we can hear from about 4 or 5 of you of just. So part of it's funny. One of the assignments I do for my students towards the end of the semester is we videotape them doing a facilitation, and they go into the 207 classes, the other class I talked about. And inevitably, almost every single one, they have to do analysis of them watching themselves on video and kind of pull out 8 specific interventions and how they work. And almost every single one of them says they were sure during the event that the silent was like 15, 30 seconds, right? And then they timed it on video and it was like 6, right? So they're like, because often they'll ask a question and then they'll rephrase the question 3 seconds. Why no? Let it. If anything, if there's silence, an introvert might get to speak, right? The extroverts kind of think out loud. They just start talking and then figure out what they want to say, right? Introverts figure it out first and then speak. So what I tell them with silence is like, if you realize, okay, I asked a bad question or a convoluted, if people are looking at you like, I have no idea what you just asked, then you rephrase, right? But if people are thinking, right, that's good, or you want them to think. So silence is okay, they'll fill it, right? So normally you kind of hear some different perspectives. So then we'll jump in, right? We're going to do this a little bit faster than normal. Okay. I'm going to use my phone just to kind of give me a sense of time. We'll probably do about like little 10-minute approaches and spend a little bit of time debriefing, but not too much, just to kind of want to give you more of an example of what the form looks like, and then in the afternoon we talk a lot more about the skills. So we're going to walk through systematically each of the approaches. I'm going to try to give a quick, like little 30-second intro to the approach, and then I'll ask what's called an opening question, and then you'll see some other interventions as we go. Right? So go ahead and pay